What if I told you that one memoir could unlock the mysteries behind America's most misunderstood communities and reveal why millions of people feel left behind in the modern economy? Today, we're diving deep into JD Vance's groundbreaking book, Hillbilly Elegy, a raw and unflinching look at life in Appalachian America that became a cultural phenomenon and sparked nationwide conversations about class, culture, and the American dream. This isn't just another rags to riches story. This is a surgical examination of how family trauma, economic collapse, and cultural identity collide to create cycles that trap entire generations. Vance takes us on a journey from the hollers of Kentucky to the suburbs of Ohio, from Yale Law School back to his grandmother's living room, painting a portrait so vivid and honest that it forced America to confront uncomfortable truths about itself. Hillbilly Elegy stands as one of the most controversial and influential memoirs of the 21st century. Published in 2016, JD Vance's deeply personal account of growing up in America's Rust Belt captured the attention of readers across political and social divides, offering an insider's perspective on a demographic that many felt had been overlooked or misrepresented in mainstream discourse. The book emerged during a pivotal moment in American politics, providing context for understanding the cultural and economic forces that shaped voting patterns and social attitudes in post-industrial communities. Vance's narrative bridges the gap between academic sociology and lived experience, presenting complex social phenomena through the lens of family relationships, personal struggles, and individual resilience. What makes this memoir particularly compelling is Vance's dual perspective as both insider and outsider. Having escaped the cycle of poverty and dysfunction that characterized much of his childhood, he returns as an educated observer capable of analyzing his own experiences with both emotional honesty and intellectual rigor. This unique vantage point allows him to explore themes that resonate far beyond his specific geographic and cultural context. The book's impact extended well beyond literary circles, influencing political commentary, social policy discussions, and cultural debates about opportunity, responsibility, and the nature of American identity. Vance's willingness to examine both external systemic factors and internal cultural dynamics created a nuanced portrait that challenged simple explanations for complex social problems, making it essential reading for anyone seeking to understand contemporary American society. Hillbilly Elegy chronicles JD Vance's journey from a chaotic childhood in Middletown, Ohio and Jackson, Kentucky to his eventual success as a Yale Law School graduate and venture capitalist. The narrative weaves between past and present, using personal anecdotes to illuminate broad patterns affecting working-class white Americans in post-industrial regions. Vance's story begins with his family's migration from the mountains of eastern Kentucky to the industrial cities of Ohio during the mid-20th century, part of a massive demographic shift that brought Appalachian culture into contact with urban industrial life. His grandparents, whom he calls Mama and Papa, embody both the strengths and contradictions of this cultural transplantation, carrying with them fierce loyalty, deep suspicion of outsiders, and a complex relationship with violence and authority. The memoir's central tension revolves around Vance's relationship with his mother, whose struggles with addiction, unstable relationships, and erratic behaviour create an environment of constant uncertainty. Through her story, Vance explores how individual choices intersect with broader social forces, examining the ways that economic instability, cultural dislocation, and family dysfunction reinforce each other in destructive cycles. Education emerges as both salvation and source of alienation in Vance's narrative. His academic success opens doors to opportunities his family never imagined, but it also creates distance from his roots and forces him to navigate between two vastly different worlds. His experiences at Ohio State University and Yale Law School reveal the cultural capital required for social mobility and the psychological costs of crossing class boundaries. The book concludes with Vance's reflections on the complex interplay between personal responsibility and structural disadvantage, avoiding simple answers while advocating for both individual agency and systemic change in addressing the challenges facing his community. The foundational event that shapes everything in Vance's narrative is his family's migration from Jackson, Kentucky to Middletown, Ohio in the 1940s and 1950s. His grandparents, Bonnie and Jim Vance, left behind the familiar world of Appalachian Kentucky, seeking better economic opportunities in Ohio's booming industrial economy. This migration wasn't unique to the Vance family, but represented a massive demographic shift as hundreds of thousands of Appalachian residents moved north for factory jobs. However, this transition came with hidden costs, as traditional support networks dissolved and cultural identity became fragmented between old mountain ways and new urban realities. Vance's relationship with his volatile mother Bev represents the book's emotional core and illustrates how addiction and instability cascade through generations. Bev's struggles with drug addiction, particularly her abuse of prescription medications, created an environment of constant chaos for young JD. Her pattern of cycling through romantic relationships meant frequent moves, changing father figures, and emotional upheaval that prevented any sense of stability or security. These experiences taught Vance early lessons about unpredictability and the need for self-reliance, but they also demonstrated how individual pathology intersects with broader social problems like the opioid crisis affecting rural and post-industrial communities. The stabilising influence of his grandmother Mamo emerges as perhaps the most crucial factor in Vance's eventual success. Despite her own rough edges and complicated history, Mamo provided the consistent presence and high expectations that Vance's mother could not offer. Her fierce protection of JD, combined with her unwavering belief in education as a path to better opportunities, created a buffer against the dysfunction surrounding him. Mamo's character embodies the contradictions of Appalachian culture, simultaneously nurturing and tough, loving and demanding, representing both the strengths that helped families survive difficult circumstances and the limitations that sometimes held them back. Vance's military service in the Marines provided crucial structure and discipline during a pivotal period of his young adulthood. The Corps offered him a chance to develop confidence, leadership skills, and a broader perspective on the world beyond his immediate community. More importantly, military service connected him with the GI Bill benefits that made college financially accessible, demonstrating how government programs can provide pathways to opportunity when combined with individual initiative and institutional support. His undergraduate experience at Ohio State University marked Vance's first serious encounter with middle-class expectations and cultural norms that differed dramatically from his upbringing. Simple things like knowing which fork to use at dinner or understanding unwritten rules about professional communication became obstacles that revealed the hidden curriculum of social mobility. These experiences highlighted how class differences extend far beyond income levels to encompass cultural knowledge, social networks, and unspoken assumptions about appropriate behaviour in different contexts. The transition to Yale Law School represented both the pinnacle of Vance's academic achievement and his deepest immersion into elite institutional culture. At Yale, he encountered classmates whose family backgrounds provided them with social capital, professional networks, and cultural fluency that he had to consciously acquire. The contrast between his experiences and those of his privileged peers revealed the multiple advantages that compound over generations in affluent families, from summer internships secured through family connections to the confidence that comes from growing up in environments where professional success is expected rather than exceptional. Throughout these transitions, Vance grappled with the tension between loyalty to his origins and the demands of social mobility. Success required him to adopt new behaviours, values and perspectives that sometimes conflicted with the culture of his childhood. This internal conflict reflected broader questions about authenticity, belonging, and the psychological costs of crossing class boundaries that affect many first-generation college students from working-class backgrounds. The book's exploration of his community's relationship with work reveals how economic changes devastated traditional sources of meaning and identity. The decline of manufacturing jobs eliminated not just income, but also the cultural framework that organised community life around stable employment, home ownership, and predictable life trajectories. Without these anchoring institutions, social problems like addiction, family breakdown, and civic disengagement proliferated, creating environments where children struggled to envision pathways to conventional success. The first crucial insight from Vance's memoir concerns the complex relationship between individual agency and structural constraints in shaping life outcomes. Rather than embracing simple explanations that blame either personal failings or systemic disadvantages exclusively, Vance demonstrates how these factors interact in ways that can either reinforce cycles of poverty or create opportunities for mobility. His own success required both personal determination and institutional support, from his grandmother's guidance to military benefits that made education accessible. This perspective suggests that effective solutions must address both individual decision-making and systemic barriers simultaneously. Cultural capital emerges as a hidden but decisive factor in determining who succeeds in crossing class boundaries. Vance's experiences navigating elite educational institutions revealed how middle and upper-class families transmit advantages through cultural knowledge, social connections, and behavioural expectations that extend far beyond formal academic requirements. Understanding professional networking, appropriate communication styles, and unwritten social rules represents a form of inherited wealth that privileged students take for granted, while first-generation college students must consciously acquire these skills. The importance of stable adult relationships in child development becomes starkly apparent through Vance's contrasting experiences with his mother and grandmother. While his mother's addiction and instability created trauma and uncertainty, his grandmother's consistent presence and high expectations provided the foundation for his eventual success. This pattern illustrates how even one reliable adult relationship can serve as a protective factor against multiple risk factors, suggesting that mentorship programs and stable institutional relationships might help compensate for family dysfunction. Economic transitions affect communities in ways that extend far beyond unemployment statistics to encompass cultural identity, social cohesion, and collective meaning-making. The decline of manufacturing in the Rust Belt eliminated not just jobs, but entire ways of life organised around industrial work, stable communities, and predictable career trajectories. When these anchoring institutions disappear, social problems proliferate as individuals lose both economic security and cultural frameworks for understanding their place in society. The geographic mobility required for economic opportunity creates psychological and social costs that policy discussions often overlook. Vance's family's migration from Kentucky to Ohio illustrates how leaving familiar communities means abandoning support networks, cultural traditions, and sources of identity that provide meaning and belonging. While mobility enables access to better opportunities, it also contributes to social isolation and cultural alienation that can persist across generations. Educational achievement alone cannot overcome all barriers to social mobility without corresponding development of social and cultural skills. Vance's academic success opened doors, but navigating elite institutions required him to master unspoken rules about professional behaviour, networking, and cultural competence that his educational background had not provided. This insight suggests that comprehensive support for first-generation college students must address social and cultural development alongside academic preparation. The opioid crisis represents both a symptom and a cause of broader social dysfunction in post-industrial communities. Vance's mother's addiction occurred within the context of economic instability, social isolation, and limited opportunities that made prescription drugs an attractive escape from difficult realities. However, addiction then compounded these problems by creating additional instability, trauma, and dysfunction that affected entire families and communities. Government programs can provide crucial support for social mobility when designed effectively and combined with individual initiative. Vance's access to military service and GI Bill benefits demonstrates how public investments in education and training can create pathways to opportunity for motivated individuals. However, these programs work best when they provide structure, clear expectations, and connections to broader institutional networks, rather than simply transferring income. The psychological challenges of social mobility include navigating conflicting loyalties between origin communities and new social environments. Success often requires adopting values, behaviours, and perspectives that differ from those prevalent in working-class communities, creating internal tension about authenticity and belonging. This suggests that support systems for social mobility must address identity conflicts and help individuals integrate different aspects of their experience rather than requiring them to abandon their origins entirely. Understanding class differences requires recognizing how advantages accumulate across generations through mechanisms that extend beyond financial inheritance. Affluent families transmit social capital, cultural knowledge, professional networks, and psychological confidence that provide their children with multiple pathways to success. Conversely, disadvantaged families often lack these resources even when they possess strong values and work ethic, illustrating why individual effort alone cannot overcome systemic inequalities. Hillbilly Elegy ultimately succeeds because it refuses to offer simple solutions to complex problems while maintaining hope that positive change remains possible. Vance's memoir demonstrates that understanding social mobility requires examining the intricate ways that family dynamics, cultural traditions, economic structures, and individual choices interact to either perpetuate disadvantage or create opportunities for advancement. The book's lasting impact stems from its ability to humanize abstract policy debates through deeply personal storytelling that reveals the lived experience behind statistical trends. By sharing his family's struggles with addiction, instability, and economic displacement alongside their strengths of loyalty, resilience and determination, Vance creates a nuanced portrait that challenges both liberal and conservative assumptions about poverty, opportunity and responsibility. Perhaps most importantly, the memoir illustrates that successful social mobility requires both individual agency and institutional support, personal transformation and systemic change. Vance's journey from a chaotic childhood to professional success depended on his own determination and hard work, but also on crucial interventions from his grandmother, military service, educational opportunities, and mentorship from professors and colleagues who helped him navigate unfamiliar social terrain. The book serves as a reminder that behind every policy debate about education, economic development, or social services are real families struggling with real problems that require nuanced understanding and comprehensive solutions. Rather than choosing between personal responsibility and structural reform, effective approaches must address both the individual behaviours and systemic barriers that shape outcomes in post-industrial American communities.